Okay, let's go through this example once more. This is example 3 from week 5. This is a form that gets served by a route. As you can see, it's localhost 8000 text form. Then the form, when you submit it, that means when you click on the send button, it's going to go back to the same route. So that you can see from here, the body of the form is going to be something like this, and action is the same route. So we will look at this animation once more to understand what's going on. Then we will look at the code and make some modifications to the code to make it a bit more difficult and understand it further. So the thing to keep in mind is that the input box here is a text input box, which means if you have typed in something there and if you click on send, the fact that it's a get form will mean that it becomes request query and full name, because full name is actually the name of that text box, which becomes a property in the query object within the request object. So that we know. And the thing is, even if you don't type in anything at all and hit send, the query full name property will be there. It's just that the value of that thing will be an empty string. It will not be undefined. So that is important to keep in mind. So with that preamble, let's actually take a look at how this thing works. So the first time you request it, you type in that localhost 8000 text form, it goes and hits your server.js, and in there is a route corresponding to text form. It's a get request because it's something that you're typing in the URL trying to get that resource. So it hits that get route. There it unpacks the query full name. At this point, what is full name? There is nothing that is specified as the value of that full name. In other words, you don't see a question mark and full name there. There's nothing there. So this guy is going to be undefined at that point. With that undefined value, you're going to render text form, which means inside the views folder, you have textform.ejs, that is this file here, and you come in there with full name as a property of the object that you're sending to it. So full name is there, and at this point, as you know, full name is undefined. So if the full name is undefined, then the if clause will be run, and it'll just run that. There's no more EJS tag there, so it's just going to print out that. That comes back to server.js, and that will be sent back to your Chrome, which will render it as a form, as you see here. That there's a text box coming from here, and there is a send button coming from this button here, and that's that. Now you go ahead and type in Alex there and hit the send button, and at this point it is actually going to the same route, which is server.get text form. At this point, the full name in the query string has a value. It is Alex. It's the value that you typed in here. So this full name at this point is going to be Alex. And then again, you're rendering the same textform.ejs with full name in an object which has a value Alex. So when you come in here, full name, is it undefined? No, far from it. It actually holds the string that reads Alex. So it is the else clause that will be hit. That says hi, whatever the value of a full name is, in this case it's Alex, and then it says hi Alex, welcome to IS 113. That will be returned here, and that will come back to your browser, and that will be rendered there. So that's the whole chain. The confusion here, or the difficulty here for some of my students, is the fact that it's the same route that is behaving differently depending on whether you're coming there for the first time looking for the form or the second time with some data being sent to the form, and that is the way it is. So let's go to our Visual Studio Code and look at it. So this is example 3 under week 5. There is a server.js. This is the same code that you saw in the slide. Let's start running this. So we have to go to example 3, and if that succeeds, let's do a node mon server.js. Now the route that we're looking for is text form. So it says enter your name EJS, and why does it say EJS? Let's look at our EJS file. So it actually comes from text form here. There we actually said EJS, and that's why it's saying that. So we're loading it for the first time, and we get the if clause of that if statement run, and that returns the form. So that's what you saw here. Now if you type in Alex, what happens is that it goes to the server and it unpacks Alex here. Now it sends Alex as a part of this object, as a property of that object. That goes into the view. There, full name is Alex now, it's not undefined. So the else clause is run and then that is displayed with full name being equal to Alex. So that we are familiar with at this point. Let's try something else now. Let's go back here, reload it for the heck of it and submit it without typing in anything. Now it says hi, nothing, welcome to IS113. This is probably not as we would like it to be, but we will hold on to that thought for a second. We'll bracket it, get back to it later. So what I want to show you here is the value of full name. So let's console log it, console log full name, save it, restart it. Let's go back here, reload it. Reloading means here I'm hitting that route. I have hit this route and I have full name unpacked now, and then I'm console logging it. At that point it's undefined because I'm just reloading it, meaning there is no query string here. Now let me submit it with Alex. As you expect, the name is Alex. So full name there is Alex. So that's as expected. Now let me go back there, reload it, undefined. Now submit it without typing in anything at all. At this point, I have a blank string. It is actually an empty string. So at this point, full name is an empty string, which is why it went into my text form and this was just an empty string. So far so good. Now what I want to do here is to do something slightly weird. So instead of having a text box, I want to make this a checkbox without changing anything else. Of course, I cannot say enter your name. So let me say something like, do you have a name? Let me save this. Now reload my form. Now it becomes, do you have a name? If I check it, let's see what happens first and then I'll explain it to you. Then it says, hi on, welcome to this. So what that means is that when I checked the checkbox and came back here after sending it, the value of full name right now is actually the name of the checkbox. Since it was checked, the value became on. So this went in there with on, and that's the reason why you saw that. That is clear. Now what I want to show you is something slightly different. Now let's go back here, reload it. So the value at this point is undefined. Very good. That's why I see the form. Now suppose I send it without checking. See what happens. The value remains undefined. The value is not an empty string as it would be if this was a checkbox. So just by looking at the value corresponding to a checkbox, you cannot really tell whether the form is loaded for the first time or the user has submitted it. So you have to do something extra here. There are multiple ways of addressing this problem. I'll focus on one robust way of doing this. This is just one of the ways that I know will work every single time. So I have implemented this in the next example. So example 4 has been revised to have this facility. So let's go to example 4. So I'm going to exit from this server. Then I'm going to go back to the previous one, which I know is example 4, server.js. So it went to example 4 and then started up that server. This is a server that we are looking at. It has a route, a get route to consent form, which unpacks 2 form elements and then passes them on to an EJS file, which we should be able to find inside views. That is right here. So the 2 data variables that came to it are submitted and agreed. Submitted, which obviously means that the form has been submitted. Agreed means the guy has checked the checkbox. So those are the things that will come back to the EJS file, the view. Let's see how they are unpacked. So agreed is basically just query agreed property. Submitted is a query submitted property. And agreed property is actually easy to see. That is this checkbox and the name is agreed. And if the guy has checked it, then the value will be on. The whole thing here will be a string that says on. And if he hasn't checked it, that is a difficult part. This will be just undefined. Submitted, on the other hand, comes from a hidden field with the name submitted and the value is set to yes. So that value, whenever the user hits the set button, will have that value for that form element and that will come here. So the moment the guy has submitted, this will always be yes, and if he hasn't submitted, that will be undefined. So the first time the guy comes here, agreed will be undefined, submitted will be undefined, and with those values you will come in here. This is undefined, that means it's false. This is undefined, that means this is false also. False and false, the whole thing is false. Then the if part will not be executed. The else part, which is down here, will be executed. So this if corresponds to this else. So you will see the form. So let's actually see that. It's right here. So there's only one checkbox, agreed to TNC, and then there's only one submit button. The hidden field, of course, is hidden. Now suppose the guy hits the submit button without actually checking the box here, then it says why not agree to the TNC, please check the TNC checkbox. So let's see how that happens. So now he has submitted but not agreed, so true and false, so the whole thing is false. So it comes down here, then it checks, is it submitted? Yes, it is submitted. So this if part is the one that actually runs. So then it says why not agree to the TNC. The next else part is actually from here. So if this thing is actually false, then the else will be hit, but now the guy has actually submitted, so this part is not hit, the else part is not hit. So the message was there, but the form is not there. So why not agree to the TNC, please check the TNC checkbox, but the TNC checkbox is not there. So the form is not actually very user friendly. We'll fix it, but we want to understand the working first. So let's go back to the form, reload it. Now consent form without any submission, so obviously not submitted, not agreed, so you get the form. That is fine. Now suppose he agrees, that means checks the checkbox and then sends, then hey you, welcome to IS 113, thank you for agreeing. So he is submitted, so submitted has a value, agreed has a value. So that's what's going on. What's the value for submitted? It is yes, because we set that as a hidden field with value yes, and the moment you hit the send button, that would be set to yes. Agreed has a value. What's the value? That comes from the checkbox. If it is checked, then the value is on. If it is not checked, then the value is undefined. That was a problem, the undefined part. Okay, so this we understand completely, except that in here, reload it, submit it. This is not quite nice. Please check the TNC checkbox. So the form should be there so that the guy can actually do it. So let's fix that. How would you do that? So what it is saying, that if it is submitted and agreed, then that message, that is fine. Otherwise, if it is submitted, then show this. And then it's the else of that, that is only if it is not submitted will we show the form, which is not true. We have to actually show the form if the guy hasn't submitted or the guy hasn't agreed. So this else is not quite right. So let's fix it. Let's delete that. Let's say it is if. What should the if read? If he has not submitted, or he has not agreed, This, I believe, will make it usable. So let's go back, start from the beginning. Form appears there, completely fine. Then say send, then why not agree to the TNC, and now the form is shown again. So this kind of manipulation of using these flags to make it user friendly is the one that trips up most of my students here and there. What they might try to do is to have the form repeated, maybe as the part of the else statement here, and again check this and repeat it there. So it might appear in multiple places, which is not ideal. They should be there only in one place. And I understand that these dealing with two Boolean flags and then trying to figure out what exactly is going on is a bit hard, especially if you don't use intuitive names like submitted and agreed. Now, there is just one more thing I want to show you. The way the form comes to you for the first time is by going to this route, and in consent form you have action pointing to the same route. It is method is get, so it's going back to the same route. Let's actually remove the action, because by default the action is actually the current URL, the route that gave you the form. So you get the form from this route. When you submit it, by default it goes there anyway, so you don't have to say it here. And that is a good idea, because the name of the route is not there in this EJS file at all. So if you happen to change the name for whatever reason, so here suppose you, instead of saying consent form, suppose you wanted to call it just consent, then you need to change it only in one place. So actually let's do this step by step. First of all, let's make sure that the form works as expected, because we made one change. One golden rule in software development is that you should make only one change at a time, because if you make two changes, if it breaks or if it works, you don't know which change actually caused that, and that will actually double your work. So make only one change, test it, and then make the second change. So we made one change here by taking out the action. So let's test it first. So go back, reload, that works fine. Send without checking anything, that works fine. Then go back, check it, and then send, that also works fine. So it works completely fine without having the action here. Very good. Now let's actually change the route. Just call it consent and nothing else. There's only one change. You don't have to change it in a consent form. That is the important part. You might think that that is silly. It's just one more place where you have to change it. But imagine in a real project, you might have hundreds of forms with hundreds of actions. And if you do it properly by self-submitting the forms, then you need to change it only in one place. Well, 100 places, but instead of 200 places. Right, so let's go back here. Now I called it consent, so let's go to consent. So that looks correct. Send, that looks correct. Now it is going to consent, that is fine. And check it, send, again it's going to consent. So the thing is that I needed to change only one word for it to work. If you had the action specified in the EJS file, there would be 2 places, double the number of places where you have to change it. One more thing I want to show you is, suppose you actually want to post rather than get. So you can copy this and create a post route. Then of course this will have to be body. This also will have to be body. But there is one thing that we need to do, that is actually setting the URL encoded business. I think that is server.set URL express.url encoded, and I don't think you need an argument there, but we'll just try this first and see if it works. Now of course, in consent form we want to say method is post, so let's go to consent. That's a get request, so I get that and submit. Cannot read agreed. So in 17 I have a problem. 17, that's a problem. So I guess this statement is probably not, is it use? Right, so it wasn't a set, it was actually use. And remember, in the beginning when we actually did this, we mounted this middleware in slash, so that is the way we used, but that also is actually not necessary, and saying that strict true in there also is not necessary. So this is the simplest form, so you can use it that way. I mean, it might have some kind of side effects that are not very obvious in this little example, but when you're doing it for real, in a real software project or in your project, you might have to worry about what this actually means, whether you have to mount it on slash or you have to actually say strict, etc. Those you will have to learn on your own while doing the project, but this actually works. Alright, so let's do this once more. Consent, loading it from consent, that's a get request. Sending it, now this is actually a post request. You can actually see that there is no query string there, so that means it was a post request that actually worked. Now suppose I agree and send, then it actually says thank you for agreeing, and again that is a post request because there is no query string there, and that was handled by this. So it's again by the same route, but except that it's a post route instead of a get route, and that makes it quite a bit easier to manage, because if you want to change something, it's best to change it only in one place, and if you have to change it, if you must change it in 2 places, it is best if those places happen to be near each other in the same file. That way you don't forget anything and introduce bugs. So that's that for this video. So we tried to understand how we can tell whether the user has submitted the form. It is easy if it is just a text form. There is a text field. That property corresponding to the name of that text field will always be there when submitted. It's just that the value might be empty. But if it is something like checkbox or even radio buttons where the user hasn't selected anything and there was no default, then that will not be empty. That will be undefined, and that makes it a bit harder to handle. Checkbox is even worse because it can be undefined, or it can be a single value as a string, or it can be multiple values in an array. So those things will make it a bit harder to handle. But you have to get used to it. There's a kind of stuff that will come back to bite you in the rear end multiple times in doing any kind of a real software engineering project associated with web application. So bye-bye for now.